In our last CFO IQ interview, I talked with a global finance executive who shared how a certain industry spreads its wings. I'm glad you're here today because in this interview, you'll hear from a global CFO who's bittersweet, maybe even semi sweet, about how finance is successfully deployed as an engine for growth. Welcome to CFO IQ, where CFOs share insights and intelligence on innovative growth strategies and the experiences that drive success for their companies and themselves. I'm your host, Andy Zizas. On today's show, I'm joined by a friend and executive who served as CEO, COO, or CFO in marquee consumer products, food, and luxury brands companies such as Gillette, Procter & Gamble, Nestle, Timex, and Hunter Douglas. Now serving as CEO of Astor Chocolate, Gary Piscatelli has earned a reputation as a transformational and pragmatic leader. Astor Chocolate sells, well, you guessed it, they sell chocolate. The global confectionary industry, interestingly, is driven by factors like rising disposable incomes, urbanization, and innovative products. That market's valued at approximately $269 billion in 2024, as projected to reach around $468 billion by 2034, with a compound annual growth rate of 5.7%. That's huge. Now, while Gary's views on business are sometimes sweet, and unlike my favorite chocolate, his perspective is rarely dark, Gary's not going to talk to us today about the chocolate industry. Gary joins us today to share his views on finance as an engine for corporate growth. Gary, I hope you don't mind the chocolate puns. I'm really glad you're here to share your perspectives with us today on CFO IQ and with our audience. Thanks for being here.
No, the puns are great, and thanks for having me. Chocolate is an interesting business, and I guess one of the things that I've never been called is sweet. So thank you.
Well, it's either sweet or salty, and I figured I'd go with the sweet. So, so Gary, let's talk growth because that's what we're here to chat about this morning. So, let me ask you: is driving growth really the CFO's role? Let's start off with that question. Even though you're a CEO today, and you've been in multiple roles, when you and I first met, you were a CFO, and is growth really the CFO's role?
I think if any CFO really steps back and thinks about it, the role of the CFO is to protect the financial interests or enhance the financial interests of the company they support. And one of the best ways to do that is to grow. Most of the work that traditional CFOs do are around reporting, around financial controls, and a lot of that, forecasting, budgeting, a lot of that is more around holding people accountable. And in most cases, when they think about numbers, they think about how to lower costs. And when you think about value in companies, a company that has equal profitability, but one company is growing profits through cost reduction and the other company is growing profits through growth. From a valuation perspective, the company that's growing through growth is much more valuable than the company that's growing through cost containment. And there's good reason for that, right? There's a limit to how much you can cost reduce. At some point, it goes away. Growth is theoretically unlimited. So if you show the potential to grow, you're increasing the value of the company. And going back to the role of the CFO is to protect and enhance the financial interests of the company. How can they not focus on growth?
But then why do some CFOs shy away from taking on that responsibility, taking on the responsibility for growth?
Annie, you and I know each other a long time. What are you afraid of? Right.
Yeah.
And that's what it really comes down to. It's like, there's lots of reasons, but first and foremost for me is fear, right? The CFO typically is not comfortable, thinking about growth. And a lot of that is because of what they were told when they first started out, because most started out as accountants, and, especially in more traditional, larger companies, like it or not, the CFO or the accountant when they first started was thought about potentially as a bean counter, right? And, hey, get me my numbers. We understand why this is off or that is off. And, they were instructed to operate a certain way and mostly instructed by peer groups in other functions, right? So it made them afraid, right? CFOs also tend to be more introspective, versus extroverts, right? So they don't always have the right personality to push back, right? And when someone's telling you to stay out of something and stay in your lane, and you're naturally not someone who's going to push back so much, I mean, you kind of fall into your lane. The other thing is inexperience, right? They're not really taught how to do growth, and they're not really taught how, the office of the CFO could drive growth. So I think a combination of fear, inexperience, and peer conflicts stop a lot of CFO in their tracks.
Hmm. It's kind of that the old-fashioned CFO, as you mentioned earlier. Tell me what happened yesterday, not about what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah. And even that, Andy, I talk to a lot of CFOs as you do, maybe not as many as you, but I talk to a lot of CFOs, and there's such a difference in terms of what CEOs, business unit presidents, or whoever you're supporting might be thinking about and what they want from the office of the CFO. And they don't do a good job describing it. But the reality is, most actually don't want a super involved operational CFO. They want a planning expert. They want someone that's going to support them. They want someone that's going to do a lot of things I just said. Maybe it's a little more savoir faire, a little more executive presence, but they still really don't want that. And, so that also gets in the way, right? It's finding that right match where someone is confident enough in themselves that if they have a strong CFO that's going to drive growth and drive other things, it's good for the company, it's good for them. And a lot of people, quite frankly, just lack that confidence. There's insecurity, even at the executive level.
Right. Gary, in the years that I've known you, you've been at a number of different companies, and I've watched carefully how you've cultivated the people who work for you, people on your team, and those who are coming up behind you. How have you encouraged staff junior to you to focus on driving growth through finance?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, right? And it starts with identifying who you think maybe has the potential. They've got, the right way of communicating with people. They listen well. They've got good analytical skills. They're good with data. So they've got to have some core skills, right? And, to the extent they have those core skills, I try and encourage them to step out of their box.
Mm.
And generally speaking, not all, but many, say, I can't do that. Like, that's not me. Right? I've heard that a lot. I'm like, yes, you can. You just haven't tried. And so part of it is just almost like, being more of a coach, right? Like, you can do it, right? You can, whether it's, making that block in a football game or catching that ball in a football game or making that pass, coaches have to encourage their team. So a lot of it's just encouraging the team, where you see potential to, try and leverage the potential that they really have been afraid to go after, right? So it starts with that. And then once you've, got them somewhat convinced, because they're still not convinced, they're still afraid that they're going to fail. And they're also afraid that if they fail, there'll be negative repercussions. So you got to make it safe and say, look, you're not going to screw up. If you screw up, don't worry about it. It's my fault. Who cares? Like, I'm the guy responsible for this, not you. You can have all the credit when we win, but if we screw it up, you can blame me. And they don't usually believe you either, right? But, I'm telling the truth. So, so it's making them feel comfortable that they can do it. And then it's finding an opportunity. And finding the opportunity is a challenge, not so much for them. It's usually a challenge for me, right? Because I've got to make sure whatever opportunity we want to chase, that things like taking down the walls in conflict and paving the way for finance to play a role there is in place, right? So as a CFO, you're going to go out there and you can do some selling with your peer group. You're going to talk about things where you think you can help. The typical response initially for me, especially in organizations is, oh, so you think you're better than me? Like, you don't think I know what I'm doing? Like, you don't have enough to do yourself that you can't just go do your own job and you need to do my job now? And no, I mean, I don't think any of those things, right? I just know that going back to the role of the CFO, my job is to protect and enhance the financial position of the company I support. And if there's big opportunity there and we haven't had time for whatever reasons to grab the opportunity, and I think the office of the CFO and the finance staff can help accelerate achievement of that opportunity, then that's all I want to do. And by the way, you can have credit too. I don't care, right? I mean, that's the nice thing about being CFO is I get credit for everything. I get blamed for everything. I get credit for everything. I don't need to be the guy, right? So and I think that's also what CEOs and CFOs need to believe is like, It's not about getting credit anymore, right? You always get credit, right? So that's really what it takes. And then it's finding an opportunity, and then it's it's setting relatively low expectations, and then trying to work your way into it. Because a lot of times, I think back to a company I was at where we wanted to put in a pricing architecture, a pricing strategy, and a methodology to try and take price increases that was more aligned to what I'll call a brand channel price matrix that made sense both internally and externally, and trying to sell that, getting all the data, both competitive and otherwise, put together in a way that made sense to people, trying to get people aligned as to thinking about it differently, trying to do it in a way where they would fight it and tell me, you guys know what you're doing, which may have been true, but no one else did either, right? And, why not try and grow? And over the course of, maybe 3 years, we went from a very naive process to a fairly sophisticated process, right? And, my understanding, not being that company more, is they've continued to evolve in a better way. And I feel proud of the fact that, hey, I think in some small way I started that, right? So I don't know. Hopefully that answers the question.
No, you know what? I did. You're spot on. You're spot on. But help me understand, in the typical corporate enterprise, does finance encourage and foster growth differently than do other departments?
Yeah. It's a yes and no answer. All right. So I'll give you the no part. Capital investments can be a vehicle for growth. Marketing investments can be a vehicle for growth. Uh, Pricing and promotions can be vehicles for growth. Even forecasting and how you look at, gaps and things like that can be vehicles for growth. Incentive plans can be vehicles growth. And job growth and pay can also enhance growth. So all of those things, finance plays a role in, right? So that's the no. It's not different, right? Uh, what is different is how you do it, right? So capital investments. In most places, when a finance person is approached with a capital investment, and this isn't everyone, right? And I want to stereotype, finance, because I'm sure there's lots and lots of good accountants and finance folks out there who think a little bit more like me, or probably even more progressive than me, right? I'm getting to be old, right? So it's capital investment. The only question is, you need to make sure that the capital investment is well thought out, that you understand what it's going to cost, that you understand when it's going to come online, that you understand what the upside might look like, and you validate your assumptions as best you can. And they're assumptions, right? So they're going to be right, they're going to be wrong, they're assumptions. But some finance folks, instead of trying to figure out how to make it a success, just want to knock it down, right? And that's their way of justifying, hey, making sure we're spending smartly.
Yeah.
And
How many times have we heard other executives miscategorize the CFO as the CF? No.
CF no, right? And sometimes, by the way, it should be no, because it's so pie in the sky, right? Or the level of investment is so high relative to your, capital bandwidth, that the risk of failure could be catastrophic, right? You should say no to that. Sometimes you got to say no, even when it's a good investment, because if it fails, because you don't know, you got to go out of business.
Right.
And you shouldn't be taking swings that put your company at risk. You should be taking swings that you can afford to strike out on, right? Right. But that being said, it's kind of how you approach it, right? So, and it also is sometimes, and this is something I developed more later in my career, because I was junior, I used to push back on this probably harder than I should, right? It's valuing the gray, valuing the experience of the people who really do some of these roles. Again, if you can afford to swing and miss, if you can't miss, forget about it. But if you can afford to swing and miss, believing in the people around you and their experience, sometimes even exclusive of having all the data. If it makes sense to you and makes sense to them and it's affordable, sometimes you got to take a few swings that are just taking a swing. And what I've found, especially when you're dealing with logical, smart peers, they're usually right. They're right more than they're wrong. And too many times CFOs or finance people turn down good opportunities because they can't value the intangibles, right? And I'm not saying you should make all decisions based on intangibles, but the intangibles do matter. And as long as they're not the only thing you're thinking about all the time, which would also be a mistake, CFOs are afraid to support the gray, right? So it's changing your mindset a little bit, but you do it in a way that's responsible, right? So it's more how you play than what you do. Now, I think in a little bit when I talk about how's that different as a CEO, and it is a little different. I can talk, but as a CFO, it's more around you're doing a lot of the traditional things you're doing, you're thinking about it a little different, you're behaving a little differently, you're a little more, a little less risk averse, but you're still risk averse, if you know what I mean. And it's more about it's the in between more so um, than anything.
So, Gary, I've heard you use the term organizational white space. Tell me what that means to you, and how does finance fill the white space to drive growth and make a difference in the enterprise?
Yeah. I keep going back to it. One of the roles of the CFO is to protect and enhance the value of the company they support, right? And the nice thing about being a CFO, it's very similar to a CEO. No one else in the company sees everything like the CEO, with the exception of the CFO.
Like the CEO, with the exception of the CFO.
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah. And the CFO has the additional insight as they tend to, if they're any good, understand how to connect the dots between numbers and operational actions better than anyone. They should be. If they can't do it better than anyone, they're probably not the right guy or woman. So now you have this person in this job that's seeing everything. They only care about the total company. They don't care about this division or that division. They don't care about this department or that department. They're empathetic, but ultimately they want to do the right thing for the company. So they're company minded, have complete visibility, understand how to connect the dots. Well, guess what? If that person can't see missed opportunities, who else can?
Right.
Theo. So you see these missed opportunities, and I call those white space. You call it things that no one's really working on. And the nice thing about the thing that no one's actually working on is when you try and butt your nose in and say, hey, I want to help. And someone says, that's my job. You say, go ahead, do it. Right. Or how can I help you? And if they can do it, great. You've done your job. If they can't do it, and they want you to help, it's hard for them to argue. Right. And, all you really need is one success. So you do it once and you're successful, and now you have permission to do it again. And you have 2 successes, 3 successes, 4 successes. And what I found in my last place, was that towards the end, you know, because we were very respectful of each other, I worked with a great team, is sometimes they'd be like, oh, why don't you let Gary do that? You know, and not to dump it on me, but it's like, hey, if he's willing, maybe he can help, right? So they actually start to seek your help, which is nice, right? And again, it was the best peer group I ever worked with. We developed that relationship, and we all knew that we wanted to help each other, right?
Hmm.
But you get that through, showing respect and delivering, and that's the perfect place for the CFO to be.
Showing respect from the C-suite as CEO or CFO to others in the enterprise.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Gary, can everyone in the enterprise drive growth? I mean, is everyone a growth driver from top to bottom?
No, I can't.
So where do you see more? Where do you see less in typical company?
Well, I go back to I'm going back to that finance person that was afraid. Finance person that's afraid, but doesn't have the innate skills to get it done. And you don't always know for certain, right? I mean, not every swing for me is a hit either, right? And don't always know. But there are some folks who you can try to get them there, and it's just not in their DNA. And it's
Yeah, I agree.
they may not be inquisitive enough. They might not be outgoing enough. They might not have the right analytical rigor. I mean, it could be a combination of things.
Right.
It doesn't mean they can't help, right?
They
But
they may they may not be able to lead an initiative, but they can certainly participate.
yeah, they can play a role, but they probably can't lead it. Exactly.
Right. That's very interesting. So Gary, I've watched your career evolve, and we're friends, and I've proudly watched your career evolve to in a direction that I always thought you'd go in. You went from CFO to COO, and now you're CEO. How do you approach things differently? You're you're still built like a CFO, but you're obviously qualified to lead as a CEO. So what do you do differently? How do you approach growth and anything else differently as a CEO versus the way you did when you were CFO?
Yeah, I never take exception with one thing you said because I'm just like I talked about executive insecurities. I'm no exception. So um, I don't like when people tell me I'm still a CFO or that I think like a CFO. Anything that puts me in a box, I resent, even though we all deserve a box. That being said, because most people think of the CFO the way that we talked about the CFOs that are afraid to do things.
Thanks.
Yeah. So to me, because there can be a negative connotation around the limits of a CFO, I don't like that. But there is a difference, right? And the difference is mostly around your own bandwidth and what you can do.
Uh-huh.
Right? When you do these things as a CFO, because the expectation is a CFO isn't going to do those things, right or wrong. It's actually nice, right? It's nice when you're the CFO because no one expects you to do these things. You know, you've got a lot of latitude as to what you want to do, right? And in the office of the CEO, you have less latitude. No, it's your responsibility now, right?
Wait, let me interrupt you. You said you have more latitude as a CFO than you do as a CEO. Did I hear that right?
You have more latitude on the choice of what you get involved in that may not be considered your responsibility. So to the extent, most companies don't actually think the CFO should be driving growth, right? Or can't drive growth, you know, no one expects you to make sure all those growth opportunities are being pursued.
Right.
And furthermore, they don't expect you to directly participate in a major way in getting it done, right? I mean, probably the most they're going to expect is that you're making sure these things are assigned to others, right? And trying to hold them accountable as best you can through the office of the CFO. I mean, that's probably what most would expect. So it gives you a little bit of latitude. It's like, hey, I want to work on X, Y, and Z. No one else is working on X, Y, and Z. Well, go knock yourself out. But if you didn't work on X, Y, and Z, no one would say, why didn't you work on X, Y, and Z? That's what I mean. Whereas the CEO has no latitude.
Hmm.
The CEO, that's your job, right? You have to do this. So that's the first difference. The other difference is the CEO, tends to have less bandwidth. You have more stuff going on that you're directly responsible for, right? So I find it harder to keep things going. Like I can start things, but I can't finish everything, right? Whereas, I had a little more bandwidth as a CFO. So I find there's a bandwidth issue and more of a need to delegate even more so than in the CFO role. So there's a few differences. Those are the things that make it harder. The things that make it easier are, for the most part, unless there's an authority limit even for the CEO, which there could be in terms of what you can execute. If you want to do something, you do it, right? I still want to sell, right? Because you want people on board, but the sell process as the boss is way easier than the sell process as a peer.
Hmm.
You know, no one will ever admit it to my face, but there's more fear to say no to me, right? So even though I think I'm still selling and I ask, it probably still is a tell, even though I say it's a sell, right?
Hmm.
That part of it is easy. I want to tell a story about kind of a new product that we launched where I am this year. And this is a product. It wasn't, it was a product that was in the marketplace. We just weren't producing it, and it was a huge trend. And people went to a candy show in Europe, ISM, which is the biggest global candy show, and they said, "Hey, everyone's trying to sell this new product. We can't make it." And they came back. We looked at some pictures, and within that meeting, I said, well, we need to come out with this as quickly as possible. And we need to showcase this as our new product of the year. And we were nowhere. And speed was really important. We were already behind. And we went from nothing to, a product line in 3 months.
Wow.
And we didn't have capability to do it. Right. So,
That's tremendous.
yeah. Now, We didn't actually probably start selling it for maybe 5 months. Um, but still, for us, that was really great. And that's where the CEO, you know, could execute something like that a lot faster than the CFO. The CFO would have convinced people. First, they would have talked to the boss. Then they would have to get their boss on board. Then they would have to get their peers on board. And then, there would have been a month spent just on negotiating, right?
Right.
And that month was really important, right? So that's where the biggest difference is the CEO just has, naturally has more authority. CEO still shouldn't just tell people what to do. The CEO, like anyone else, should still try and get people on board and sell. But ultimately, that authority difference can drive speed of execution better than the CFO.
Hmm. I would agree. I would agree completely. So, Gary, going back to your history of cultivating and encouraging and bringing people up behind you to achieve their own success, what advice would you give to the CFO who wants to make more of an operating difference and hasn't figured out on his or her own how to do that?
Yeah. First one was pick the right boss.
Pick the right boss. I don't
Okay.
think I've ever heard that before. Pick the
The right
right.
boss.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
And that's not always easy, but look, if you work for someone who is dead set against what finance should be working on, and they don't care what your capability is, they don't care if you have time, that, everyone has their box and you're in your box and don't leave your box, it'd be really hard to be successful in that organization.
Mm.
So finding a boss that's more open to, versatile athletes that want to try and want to help and in whatever way they can is super important, right? Because without that, it's really hard. The second thing is have some guts, take a chance, believe in yourself, right? Right. And if you find the right boss, if you're willing to try, and most CFOs, more CFOs, especially at that level, probably have the capability and don't have the capability, especially if you've gotten to the CFO level. You just got to be willing to try. And, don't swing for the fences right away. It's like anything else. Deliver a success, no matter how small it is. It wasn't expected. You're still over delivering against expectations, right? So it's a big win in everyone else's eyes, regardless of what you think. And then just build upon that success. And the more success you are, the more chances you'll get. It's that simple.
The more successful you are, the more chances you get because those who have the opportunity to give you opportunities will see that you're capable.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's that simple and it's that hard, right? I mean, there's a lot of work to try and deliver on those things, but it's as simple as that.
So, Gary, you and I, like I've said a few times, we've known each other for a long time. We've become friends. Something I've enjoyed tremendously. You've participated a lot with us at CFO Intelligence, and you've been very gracious about that. You've commented more than once that CFO Intelligence has contributed to your success. I'm flattered and grateful that you would say something like that. But how has CFO Intelligence participated in what you've achieved?
Yeah, in a couple of different ways. I mean, the networking opportunities are nice. Not so much for for jobs, right? That's not. I'm not looking for a job when I'm having these conversations, but to be able to talk to other smart professionals,
Mm.
to hear about what they're doing, to hear about what they're not doing, and just their perspective is valuable because you don't get that a lot. And you question yourself all. I mean, I think good people should question themselves all the time, and it's nice to have other people to talk to, right? So, there's value with that. And to me, that's why I do it, right? I do it for just to have some, good, smart people to talk to that can be helpful. And to me, that's enough.
Well, thanks for that, Gary. I find that the folks that we attract at CFO Intelligence, like you, are pretty accomplished and are smart people. And interestingly enough, and pleasantly, I find that most of them are pretty nice people. Finance executives, they're ethical folks. They're hardworking. They're dedicated as a group, and just good people. People I enjoy hanging around with. So I consider myself lucky to be in this group.
Now that you say it, I think about the group of people that you've brought together. You're right. There's a lot of people probably think these CFOs are all a bunch of jerks, right, and full of themselves, and they're not. They're just decent people, right?
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Yeah. I agree with you. Gary, you know what? We could go on for hours. I always enjoy our conversations. Thank you very, very much for speaking with me today. You're a good friend. You're a very accomplished executive, and I'm glad that I've had the opportunity to participate with you and watch you accomplish what you've accomplished. And frankly, I'm sure our audience, both your CEO and CFO peers, will get a lot out of today's conversation, even though you didn't bring any chocolate.
Well, I do have some here, but I'm trying not to, you know, publicize my company. But I brought that new product with me, but I won't show it on screen. But no, thank you for that, and I do appreciate the opportunity, and thanks for making me a part of CFO Intelligence.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you too for joining us here today on CFO IQ. If you'd like to learn more about Gary Piscatelli, visit our website at cfoiq.com. If you'd like to be considered for a CFO IQ interview or for a business story to appear in CFO Intelligence magazine, or if you just have some great ideas that you'd like us to explore, then email me at andrew.zizas@cfointel.com. That's Intel with two L's, and let me know your ideas. Join us again here on CFO IQ for our next interview with finance executive Virginie Costa. Virginie is former CFO of incredible brands including Wella, Godiva, Burberry, and Hermes. Thanks for joining us here on CFO IQ. I'm Andrew Zizas. You keep thinking.
For booking inquiries, please visit www.cfoiq.com or email andrew.zizas@cfointell.com.